My father missed my mother's funeral to go on vacation with his mistress. That night, I received a text from her phone. I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery. Now. I drove over there, and what I witnessed made my blood freeze. Can you imagine the earth swallowing your mother whole, only for her to text you from the grave just hours later? I'm not dead. Come to the grave now, my heart stopped. My own father, celebrating a new chapter with his mistress while my mother was being buried. What the hell happened next? Just a few weeks ago, my mother was still here. I can picture her now, in her garden, laughing, her hands in the soil. She was life itself. Then one morning, that call came. The hospital. My mother gone. Sudden cardiac arrest. The funeral was a blur, rain mixing with my tears. And my father? He didn't even show up. He was in Hawaii, I later found out, hand in hand with some young woman, smiling for the camera. As they lowered her coffin, I stood there, numb, telling myself it was over. But that night my phone buzzed. A message from her number. I'm not dead. Come to the grave now. I froze. Every instinct screamed no, but my feet were already moving. Out into the rain, my heart a drum against my ribs. The cemetery was silent, streetlights flickering off her tombstone. And then through the misty fog, I saw a figure. Standing right there, before her fresh grave. Hi, my name is Oliver Harris. I'm 33 and I live in Portland, Oregon. On the surface, my life probably looked like a perfect picture. I'm an architect at a prestigious firm. I have my wonderful wife, Audrey, whose smile really does melt away all my worries, and our 5-year-old son, Nathan, with eyes full of endless questions. Our modern wooden house by the river, bathed in morning sunlight, was supposed to be our sanctuary. Every day I'd wake up, brew coffee, hear Audrey and Nathan giggling in the kitchen, and think, man, I'm truly lucky. But no picture is ever truly perfect. No matter how carefully you paint it. Behind the brilliance of happy days, there are always shadows. And my shadow, it began with my family, with my father and my mother. My father, Leonard Harris, is a titan in Portland's real estate world. At 65, he still runs Harris Capital, a company that spans from Oregon to California. He's always polished, always in tailored suits. His voice? Calm but sharp, like every word is meticulously calculated. To outsiders, he's an icon of success. But to me, he was a stone wall, cold, unapproachable, and somehow always making me feel like I was never quite good enough. I remember once I was 25 and I won my first design award. I was so proud. I rushed to show him. He barely glanced at the certificate. His voice flat even. Good job, Oliver. But working for someone else is just working for someone else. It cut like a knife. I was used to him downplaying my achievements, of course. To him, I was just an architect, not the heir to his empire. He wanted me to take over Harris Capital, but I refused. I didn't want to live in his shadow. I didn't want to become another version of Leonard Harris. My mother, Eleanor, she was his complete opposite. At 62, she still had the gentle, refined air of an art teacher. She'd retired a few years back, spending her days painting and tending her backyard garden. Weekends, Audrey, Nathan, and I would visit. Those afternoons were my favorite. Mom would take Nathan to the garden, teaching him to plant wild daisies. I'd fix a bookshelf or check her plumbing. Dad was usually busy with work, so he rarely joined us. In those moments, Mom would look at me, smile, and say, "You're my pride, Oliver. No matter what your father says, I know you've chosen the right path." She was always the mediator, trying to soothe the tension between Dad and me. I remember his anger when I didn't follow his wishes. Mom would pull me aside, give me a cup of tea, and tell me stories about her youth. About being a passionate teacher, showing her students the beauty in simple things. She was my light, the one who made me believe I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not even my father. My life went on like that, balanced precariously between the happy days with Audrey and Nathan and the shadows of my strained relationship with my father. I tried not to think about him, about his cutting words or his disappointed looks. I told myself I had everything, a warm little family, meaningful work, and a mother who loved me unconditionally. But deep down, I knew this piece was fragile, like a pane of glass. A single crack could shatter it all. That morning started like any other. Early to the office, preparing for a big meeting. We were adjusting blueprints for a green urban project. I was excited to present my idea for a central park, all shaded pathways. My colleague Helena nodded in approval. My boss, Mr. Daniels, even laughed. "Oliver, you're always trying to turn Portland into a forest, aren't you?" I laughed back, feeling at ease. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I usually ignore calls during meetings, but something about the persistent ringing gave me a terrible feeling. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and picked up. "Hello, is this Mr. Oliver Harris?" The voice was a woman's, trembling, trying to stay calm. "I'm a nurse from Portland General Hospital. I'm so sorry to inform you that your mother, Mrs. Eleanor Harris, passed away this morning. She suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. We did everything we could, but I didn't hear the rest." Her voice faded into a distant hum, like I was sinking underwater. My heart pounded, blood rushed to my ears, and the world just collapsed. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "No, you're mistaken. My mother can't." I stopped, realizing I was talking to myself. The nurse was still apologizing, but I couldn't process it. "You're saying my mother died of a heart attack?" I asked again, my voice shaking, as if asking enough times would change the answer. "How is that possible? My mother was healthy. No history of heart problems." "Are you sure it's Eleanor Harris?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice softening. "I'm so sorry. Can you come to the hospital now? We need you to complete some paperwork." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I hung up, frozen in the hallway. Everything around me, the laughter from the meeting room, the sunlight, the traffic, felt alien. A terrible dream. I don't remember how I went back into that room or what I said. All I know is I rushed out, got in my car, and drove in a daze. Rain began to fall, streaking down the windshield as if the sky itself were crying with me. In my mind, one question screamed, how could my mother be gone like that? How could someone so full of life vanish in a single moment? I pressed the gas. The car sped through familiar streets, but everything felt alien. The rain grew heavier, casting a gray veil over the city. The wipers screeched rhythmically, trying to anchor me to reality. But my mind was lost. I couldn't accept it. My mother, with her gentle smile, hands always stained with garden soil, her voice warm as sunlight, couldn't be gone. Not from some senseless heart attack. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to stay calm, but my chest felt crushed. My breathing came in short, ragged gasps. I was falling into a bottomless abyss. I wanted to scream, to hit something. But all I could do was drive. Memories flooded back. I saw myself at 10, at the kitchen table. Mom, in a floral apron, holding a paintbrush. "Oliver, look at this," she'd say, her voice soft. "Every line tells a story. You don't need to draw perfectly. Just draw with your heart." I'd scribble houses and trees for hours, and she was always there, smiling, praising my clumsy sketches. Those afternoons sparked my love for architecture. But not all memories were warm. I remembered Dad walking in, his cold eyes scanning my drawings. "What's the point of all this doodling, Eleanor?" He'd say, his voice flat, dripping with disdain. "He needs to learn to work seriously, not daydream like you." Mom would stay silent, just squeeze my hand tighter, as if to tell me I didn't need to prove anything to him. But his words cut, leaving scars that never fully healed. Back in the present, the rain outside grew heavier. I grabbed my phone, dialed my father's number, hoping he could explain. Anything. It rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. I called again. And again. Each unanswered ring stabbed into my chest. Why wasn't he picking up? Where was he? Did he even know Mom had... I couldn't finish the thought. A bad feeling stirred, a dark cloud. Dad was always in control. Of his business, his family, even other people's emotions. Could he know something I didn't? The drive to Portland General Hospital felt endless. When I parked, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the car door. I ran into the lobby, breath ragged, heart pounding. The receptionist seemed to be expecting me. "Mr. Harris, this way, please." She led me down a long corridor. The sharp smell of antiseptic made me nauseous. At the end of the hall, I saw him, Leonard Harris, in a perfectly tailored gray suit, talking to a doctor, calm, too calm, like he was discussing a real estate deal, not the death of his wife. "Dad," I choked out, my voice breaking. "What's going on? Is she really?" He turned, his eyes were cold as stone. "Oliver, you're here." The doctor was just explaining. "Your mother had a heart attack, a stroke. They couldn't save her." His voice was steady. Not a tremor. Not a hint of grief. I stared, searching for any sign of loss. But all I saw was an impassive wall. The doctor, a middle-aged man with thin-framed glasses, spoke up. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harris. Mrs. Eleanor was brought here this morning, but her heart had stopped before we could intervene. No warning signs. A sudden stroke. Sudden? I nearly shouted, startling them both. My mother had no history of heart problems. Just a few weeks ago, she was playing with my son, planting flowers, laughing. How could she? Who brought her here? What happened? My father cut me off, his voice sharp. That's enough, Oliver. Don't make a scene. Your mother is gone. Now we need to handle the paperwork and maintain the family's dignity. Understood? He emphasized dignity as if that were the only thing that mattered. I stood there stunned. Dignity? My mother had just died and he was worried about dignity? I wanted to scream, to grab him, demand answers. But I couldn't. A nurse approached, handing me a bag of my mother's belongings. A small wallet. The pearl earrings she loved. A handkerchief embroidered with daisies. I clutched it, feeling like my heart was being crushed. The faint scent of her perfume lingered, as if she were still somewhere close. My father turned away, pulling out his phone, stepping into the hallway to speak with someone. I watched his back. A chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. He was too calm, too detached. The woman he'd lived with for over 30 years was gone. Yet there he stood, signing papers, making calls, as if it were just another day at the office. I sank into a chair in the waiting room, mother's belongings in my lap. The hospital corridor was cold. The sound of footsteps echoed like they came from another world. I looked down at the handkerchief, my fingers tracing the embroidered daisies. In my mind, images of my mother's radiant smile mixed with my father's cold stare. The bad feeling grew stronger, an undercurrent pulling me under. My mother's death wasn't simple. I didn't know why, but I felt it deep in my bones. 3 days later, I stood before the cemetery. The sky was gray, heavy, like it was holding its breath. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick and damp. I'd taken care of everything for the funeral. The coffin. The flowers. The ceremony. My father hadn't helped at all. He'd called the night before, his voice curt. I'm tied up with some paperwork for the estate. Can you handle it? I clenched my teeth, managed a yes. Inside, I wanted to scream. How could he be so heartless? This was his wife, the woman who stood by him for over 30 years. Yet paperwork was his excuse. I stood at the cemetery gate, greeting relatives, my mother's old friends. They hugged me, offered condolences I couldn't fully process. Eleanor was a wonderful woman. She left us too suddenly. We'll miss her smile. Each word felt like a knife, a fresh reminder she was truly gone. But what stung more were the whispers. Where's Leonard? Why isn't he here? It's strange. A husband not attending his wife's funeral. I heard them, but kept my head down, trying to maintain that dignity Dad had demanded. I didn't want them to see our family as a broken drama. Audrey stood by my side, her hand gripping mine tightly. She didn't say much, just squeezed gently, my anchor in this storm. Nathan, my little son in a black suit too big for him, looked around, confused. Daddy, where's Grandma? His voice was clear but full of uncertainty. I knelt, pulled him into my arms, fought back tears. Grandma, she's in a beautiful place now, buddy. She's planting daisies in heaven. He nodded, but I knew he didn't understand. How could a 5-year-old comprehend such a loss? When my mother's coffin was brought out, my legs turned to stone. The oak casket was covered in white daisies, her favorite flower. I walked behind it, each step heavy, like I was treading a path with no destination. People bowed their heads, some sobbed. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart. As the coffin was lowered, I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears spilled over, hot, streaming down my cheeks. I missed her. Her departure was too sudden, too senseless. Like a book torn apart mid-story. Audrey wrapped her arms around me, whispering, You're not alone, Oliver. I'm here. Nathan's here. I nodded, but inside I felt hollow. I wanted to scream, to demand why she had to go, why no one could give me an explanation. But I just stood there, watching as shovelfuls of earth covered the coffin, burying a part of my life along with it. My father didn't show up. Not a call. Not a text. Not a single word of concern. I had hoped even just a little that he'd appear at the last moment. That he'd stand there even if he didn't cry, just to maintain the facade of a grieving husband. But no, Leonard Harris chose to be absent. His absence was a slap in the face, a betrayal of everything my mother had sacrificed for this family. When the funeral ended, Audrey and I took Nathan home. Our wooden house by the river, once filled with laughter, now felt suffocatingly silent. Audrey made me a cup of tea. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes full of worry. I shook my head, unable to speak. I picked up my phone, scrolling aimlessly. Then I opened my father's social media page. Something I rarely did. His posts were usually just photos of real estate projects, wine tasting events, cliché quotes about success. But this time I froze. A photo. My father, in a white suit, next to a young woman far too young. Maybe in her 30s. They stood on a balcony, smiling brightly, wine glasses sparkling. The caption was short, but it cut like a knife. A new chapter in life. I felt the blood rush to my head, my breath catching in my throat. My mother had been buried just hours ago, and my father, her husband, was publicly flaunting a new chapter with a stranger. I gripped the phone, wanting to smash it, to scream, to confront him right then. Audrey noticed my expression. "Ollie, what's wrong?" I handed her the phone, unable to speak. She looked at the screen, her eyes widening, then slowly lowering, as if she couldn't believe it either. The pain inside me erupted into pure rage, like a wildfire. I stood up, walked to the bookshelf where I kept an old framed wedding photo of my parents. In the picture, Mom was young, radiant in her white dress. Dad, though stern, looked at her with what I once thought was love. I touched the frame, my fingers trembling. "Mom," I whispered. "What happened to you? Why is he doing this?" My gaze hardened. A part of my heart had turned to ice. The bad feeling was no subtle undercurrent anymore. It was a storm roaring in my chest. My mother's death wasn't random. I had no proof, no answers. But I knew, deep in my core, that the truth was being hidden. And I, Oliver Harris, would not stop until I uncovered it all. That night, after Audrey had gone to bed and the house was swallowed by darkness, I sat in the living room, holding the bag of my mother's personal belongings. The small wallet, the pearl earrings, the daisy-embroidered handkerchief, simple items that carried the weight of her entire life. I opened the wallet, my fingers brushing over an old photo of me and Nathan she always kept with her. Tears welled up again, but I clenched my jaw. I didn't want to cry anymore. I wanted to understand. To know why my mother was gone. Why my father was acting as if she meant nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A sharp, cold sound that shattered the silence. I glanced at the screen. My heart seemed to stop. My mother's number. Unmistakable. A short message. "I'm not dead. Come to my grave now." I froze. My hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Was this some cruel joke? A system error? My mother was dead. I had seen her coffin lowered. Felt the cold earth cover her life. So where did this message come from? I stared at the screen, begging it for answers. Then, with shaking hands, I called the number back. It rang once, twice, then cut off abruptly, as if someone didn't want to answer. I called again and again, but only silence. A powerful instinct surged within me. A fire in my chest. I stopped thinking. I jumped up, grabbed a flashlight, threw on a raincoat, and rushed out the door. Audrey was asleep. I didn't want to wake her. I didn't know what I was doing, only that I had to get to the cemetery. I had to find the truth. The car sped through the night, light rain blurring the windshield. The road to the cemetery was pitch black, lit only by my weak headlights. I gripped the steering wheel, my heart pounding as if it would burst. The cemetery loomed before me, cold and eerie. Rows of tombstones fading into the dim light like silent specters. I parked, stepped out. The rain soaked through my coat, chilling my skin, but I didn't care. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dirt path to my mother's grave. Each step felt like it carried 1,000 pounds. But I couldn't stop. I had to know. I had to see. As I approached the grave, I froze. A figure stood there, a few meters away, right in front of the freshly covered tombstone. A frail, trembling silhouette, but achingly familiar. I aimed the flashlight. The beam lit up her face. My mother, it was her. Thinner, her hair matted from the rain, but her eyes still bright, still warm, still my mother. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to breathe, unable to believe my eyes. This couldn't be real. My mother was dead. I had buried her. "Oliver," she whispered, her voice faint but clear. Then she broke into sobs, her frail shoulders trembling. I rushed forward, wrapping her in my arms, tears streaming uncontrollably. She felt so real, overwhelming, the warmth of her body, the faint scent of her perfume, the embrace I thought I'd lost forever. I trembled, crying and holding her tightly, terrified that if I let go, she'd vanish like a dream. Mom, Mom. I could only repeat, my voice breaking. How? How are you alive? She took my hand, her fingers cold but firm. She looked into my eyes, her gaze a mix of pain and resolve. You can't tell anyone I'm alive, she whispered, her voice trembling, as if afraid someone might overhear. I'll explain everything, Oliver. I had a reason to fake my death. I was stunned. 1,000 questions flooded my mind. A plan? Who helped her? Why did she have to fake her death? And why did she choose me? Trusting me with this message? I wanted to ask, to understand, but no words came out. The rain continued to fall, light and cold, cloaking us in a thin veil of mist. We stood there beside her freshly covered grave in the dark cemetery. Like two lost ghosts in a surreal story, fear and mystery enveloped me. But in that moment, I knew one thing. My mother was alive. Suddenly, she grabbed my hand, pulling me away from the dim glow of the flashlight. It's not safe here, she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. Follow me, Oliver. We need to talk. I nodded, my mind still reeling, and followed her through the rows of tombstones, down a narrow path leading out of the cemetery. The rain soaked through my coat, but I didn't feel the cold. The only feelings coursing through me were shock mingled with joy, and an unnamed, chilling fear. She led me to an old car parked at the corner of the road, a faded silver sedan that looked nothing like any vehicle my family owned. She opened the door, gestured for me to get in. I hesitated, staring at her, still unable to believe she was flesh and blood. Mom, are you sure you're okay? I asked, my voice faltering. She just nodded, her eyes a mix of tenderness and tension. Get in, son. I'll explain. We drove off into the night, my mother behind the wheel, me beside her, still clutching that daisy-embroidered handkerchief. The house she took me to was tucked away in a corner of Portland's outskirts, hidden behind old oak trees. Small, weathered, with a chipped tile roof and heavy curtains. My mother turned off the engine, scanned the surroundings as if afraid someone was watching, then led me inside. The interior was sparse, almost empty. A wooden table, a few chairs, a fold-out bed. Nothing like the luxurious mansion she'd shared with my father. She poured me a glass of water, but I didn't drink. I sat looking at her, waiting. She sat across from me, her thin hands clasped tightly as if trying to keep herself from falling apart. I know you're angry, she began, her voice raw. Angry that I hid this from you, that I let you endure the pain of losing me. But you have to understand, Oliver. I had no other choice. I shook my head, trying to suppress the surge of emotions. Mom, why? Why did you have to do this? Why fake your death? And Dad, does he have anything to do with this? Just mentioning my father made my blood boil. The image of him with that young woman cutting into my heart. My mother took a deep breath, her eyes darkening as if sifting through painful memories. It started a few months ago, she said. Your father. He changed, Oliver. He became colder, more ruthless. I discovered he was having an affair with a young woman, Vanessa, who works at his company. He wasn't just sneaking around. He was blatant about it, as if he wanted to humiliate me. I clenched my fists, trying not to interrupt. I had suspected as much, but hearing her confirm it felt like a punch to the chest. She continued, her voice trembling with anger and pain. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. Instead, he threatened me. He wanted me to sign over assets. Shares in the company, properties, everything in my name. He said if I didn't agree, I'd disappear. Disappear? I repeated, my voice choking. You mean Dad threatened to kill you? She nodded, her eyes red with tears. I wasn't sure if he'd actually go through with it, but I felt the danger. He started watching me, Oliver. I found hidden cameras in the bedroom, in the living room. He'd fly into rages out of nowhere. And once he even shoved me when I refused to sign the papers. One night, he just lost control, screaming that I'd regret not obeying him. That's when I knew I had to do something to protect myself. I sat in silence, feeling the world crumble again. My father. The man I'd thought was merely domineering and cold. Could he be this cruel? I remembered his emotionless gaze at the hospital, the way he hurriedly signed papers, as if my mother's death was just another task. But she wasn't done. I had an old friend at Portland General Hospital, she said, her voice steadier now, recounting a carefully calculated plan. Her name is Martha. I told her everything, and she agreed to help. We planned to fake a heart attack. The housekeeper didn't know anything, so when I collapsed, she panicked and called for help immediately. Everything went as planned. At the hospital, Martha recorded that I'd gone into cardiac arrest and helped me leave through a back exit. They used a mannequin to substitute the body. Everyone, including your father, believed I was dead. I listened, my head spinning. Mom, you planned all of this? But why didn't you tell me? Do you know how much it hurt to think you were gone? My voice broke, torn between anger and love. I thought of the past few days, the sleepless nights, the tears at the funeral. She had let me endure it all without a single hint. She lowered her head, tears streaming. I'm sorry, Oliver. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't take the risk. Your father, he's too dangerous. If he suspected even the slightest thing, I don't know what would have happened. I chose you because I knew you wouldn't abandon me, because you're the only one I trust. I looked at her, my heart torn. I pitied her, this woman who had to stage her own death to survive. But I was also angry. Angry at being kept in the dark. Angry at my father, the man I called Dad, for pushing her to this point. The image of him in his perfect suit with that cold smile now felt like a direct threat. I'd once thought he was just controlling, but now I saw he was far more dangerous. She gripped my hand, her eyes resolute. I had no other choice, Oliver. Faking my death was the only way to survive and make him let his guard down. But now I need you. We have to uncover the truth before he finds out I'm still alive. I stood frozen. Each word from my mother cut through the shock, gripping me like a knife. Outside, the rain pounded relentlessly on the tin roof, mingling with our ragged breaths in that small house. The dim yellow light cast shadows on her gaunt face, highlighting the lines of fear and resilience. I looked at her, the woman I thought I'd lost forever, and felt a fire ignite in my chest. Pain, rage, and a profound love for my mother fused into a cold, hard determination. I would protect her, and I would make my father Leonard Harris pay for what he'd done. But I knew this wasn't the time for impulsive actions. If my mother was right, if my father was truly as dangerous as she said, we needed evidence. A solid plan. I gripped her hand tightly, my voice. Mom, I'll do whatever it takes to help you. But I need to know what you want me to do. Where do we start? She sighed, her eyes scanning the bare room as if searching for an anchor. We need evidence, Oliver. Evidence of what he's done. Not just to me, but everything he's hidden in the past. Your father is careful, but he's overconfident now. He thinks I'm dead, that no one stands in his way. This is our chance. I nodded, though my mind was still in turmoil. I wanted to scream, to confront my father right then, but I knew she was right. We needed to act smart, not emotional. I'll keep this secret, Mom, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I won't tell anyone, not even Audrey or Nathan, but you have to promise me you won't disappear again. I couldn't handle losing you a second time. She gave a sad smile, gently stroking my cheek, just like when I was a child. I promise, Oliver. From now on, I won't hide anything from you. Returning home that night, I felt like I was living in two worlds. One was the warm wooden house by the Willamette River, where Audrey and Nathan slept peacefully, where I once thought everything was perfect. The other was a dark storm, where my mother had to fake her death to survive, where my father, the man I called Dad, might be far more ruthless than I ever imagined. I slipped into the house quietly, careful not to wake Audrey. She lay in bed, her breathing steady, but I couldn't join her. I sat in the living room, staring at the framed photo of my mother on the small altar, wondering how I could keep this secret from the wife I loved more than anything. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I brewed coffee, made toast for Nathan, drove him to preschool. Audrey looked at me, her eyes full of concern. Are you okay, Oliver? She asked, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. You look like you haven't slept all night. I forced a smile, trying to hide the tension. I'm fine, honey. It's just, I'm still not used to Mom being gone. Audrey hugged me and I felt a pang of guilt for not telling her the truth. But I had promised my mother, and I couldn't take the risk. Not because I didn't trust Audrey, but because I feared any small mistake could put my mother in danger. Meanwhile, my mother stayed hidden in the suburban house, contacting me only through an encrypted phone provided by an old friend. Each time I received a message from her, my heart raced as if I were living in a spy thriller. Don't call directly, she instructed. Only text when necessary. And be careful, Oliver. Your father isn't easily fooled. While my mother lived like a ghost, my father, Leonard Harris, was reveling in a lavish lifestyle. I checked his social media, and each post stabbed my heart anew. There he was, on a yacht in California, arm around that young woman, Vanessa, smiling as if he'd never lost his wife of 30 years. Another post from Vegas, a cocktail in hand, with the caption, "Freedom is living true to yourself." I gripped the phone, wanting to smash it. But I knew I had to stay calm. My father was overconfident, as my mother said. That was our advantage. I decided to use his absence to act. The family mansion, where I grew up, where my mother once tended her daisy garden, became my target. I knew my father had a private study where he kept important documents. If there was any evidence of what he'd done to my mother, it would be there. One evening after Audrey and Nathan were asleep, I drove to the mansion. The night was pitch black, only faint streetlights illuminating the road. I still had a key, but I didn't want to turn on any lights or draw attention. I stepped inside, my heart pounding, feeling like a thief in my own childhood home. My father's study was on the second floor behind a heavy oak door with an electronic lock. Fortunately, I knew the code: my mother's birthday. A detail that now felt both bitter and ironic. Inside the room was just as I remembered: a large wooden desk, shelves filled with binders, the faint smell of leather. I began searching, careful not to disturb anything. The drawers were full of contracts, invoices, routine business documents. But I knew my father wasn't that simple. He always hid important things where no one would think to look. After nearly an hour, I noticed a panel on the wall behind the desk that seemed out of place. I tapped it lightly. A hollow sound. My heart raced. Using a letter opener, I carefully pried it open. Behind it was a small old safe with a combination lock. I tried several combinations: my father's birthday, my mother's, mine. None worked. Finally, I tried their wedding anniversary. The safe opened with a dry click. Inside was a treasure trove of dark secrets. I found bank statements showing massive transfers to offshore accounts: Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, places I'd only heard of in financial scandals. There were forged contracts with my mother's signature, transferring shares and properties I knew she'd never agreed to. But what chilled me to the bone was a small USB drive, an old stack of newspapers, and a few cassette tapes. I plugged the USB into my laptop, my hands trembling. An audio file appeared, recorded over 20 years ago. I pressed play. My father's voice came through, harsh and filled with anger. "You think you can control me forever, Charles?" he shouted. "This fortune belongs to me, not you or your daughter." The responding voice was my grandfather's, calm but firm. "Leonard, you won't touch a cent unless Eleanor agrees. You know that." The argument escalated, my father's threats growing darker, until the recording cut off abruptly. I opened the stack of newspapers, my heart pounding. They were local papers from over 20 years ago. Headlines about a car accident that killed my grandparents. I remembered my mother telling me, her voice heavy with grief, that they died during a business trip. At the time, I thought it was a random tragedy. But now, piecing together the recording, my father's resentful tone, and the timing of the accident just days later, I began to suspect. Was my father directly involved? Did he do something to seize my mother's inheritance? I photographed everything, backed up the data to my phone and a spare hard drive. Then I drove back to the suburban house, my heart heavy. When I told my mother, she sat silently, her trembling hands clutching her glass of water. "I always suspected," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I always felt my parents' deaths weren't normal, but I had no proof, and I couldn't bring myself to believe Leonard could go that far." I took her hand, feeling the world crumble again. "Mom, we're not just dealing with a cheating husband," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "We're dealing with someone who might have been hiding crimes for 20 years. She nodded, her eyes no longer just filled with sorrow, but burning with resolve. "We'll expose him, Oliver. For me, for you, and for everyone he's hurt." I looked at my mother, a woman who had endured so much, and felt a new fire ignite in my chest. It wasn't the blind rage of anger, but a cold, sharpened determination. Like a blade honed to perfection. My father, Leonard Harris, had built an empire on lies, betrayal, and possibly crimes I hadn't dared to imagine. But now he would face the truth, and my mother and I would be the ones to pull back the curtain. I gripped her hand, my voice firm but resolute. "Mom, we'll do this the right way. No impulsiveness, no letting emotions take over. We need to build a solid case, so when he falls, he won't get back up." She gave a faint but steadfast smile. "You're truly my son, Oliver. Always thorough, always thinking before acting. I know someone who can help us." Charlotte Wells, a lawyer specializing in finance and estates. She was my best friend in college. If anyone knows how to deal with men like your father, it's Charlotte. I nodded, feeling a spark of hope in the darkness. So where do we start, Mom? The documents I found, the bank statements, forged contracts, the recording. Are they enough? They're enough to start, she said, her eyes lighting up. But we need more. Your father is careful. He won't let himself be caught easily. We need additional evidence, and we need to do everything legally so when the truth comes out, he can't escape. The days that followed felt like I was living two lives. By day, I was still Oliver Harris, architect, husband, father, dropping Nathan off at preschool, laughing with Audrey, working on blueprints at Urban Vision. But by night, I became someone else, a truth seeker, quietly piecing together the puzzle to dismantle my father's empire. Meanwhile, my father seemed utterly unaware. I monitored him through social media, where he continued to post about his lavish lifestyle. Standing on a yacht in Malibu, dining by candlelight in an upscale restaurant, strolling on a beach with Vanessa. Each photo was a stab to my heart, but also an opportunity. He was overconfident, believing he'd escaped all constraints. That my mother was dead and no one could stand in his way. He didn't know that every move was being watched, that each smug smile only fueled my determination. I began to act. First, I contacted Charlotte Wells, my mother's lawyer friend. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of Portland where no one knew me. Charlotte was a woman in her 50s, with short silver hair and eyes as sharp as a hawk's. As I recounted my mother's story, the fake death, my father's threats, the documents I'd found, she listened intently, taking notes without betraying any emotion. When I handed her copies of the bank statements, forged contracts, and the recordings, she finally spoke. This is a big case. Leonard Harris isn't just an adulterer. If what you're saying is true, he could be running an illegal financial network. But we need more evidence, and we need to do this by the book. Charlotte began organizing the documents, turning my scattered pieces into a coherent internal investigation file. She categorized the bank statements, scrutinized the forged contracts, and hired an audio expert to verify the recording. This recording is crucial, she said. It shows Leonard's intent, but we need to tie it to specific actions. Can you get more data from his company? I knew it was a dangerous task, but I nodded. Harris Capital, my father's company, was a fortress. Tight security, loyal staff. But I had an advantage. I was Leonard Harris's son. Though he never saw me as his heir, I still had limited access to some company systems from helping with design projects in the past. One evening, I went to Harris Capital's headquarters pretending to retrieve old design documents. The security guard, Frank, a middle-aged man, greeted me warmly. "Haven't seen you in a while, Oliver," he said, his tone friendly. I smiled, hiding my tension. "Yeah, I just need to grab some blueprints. Dad asked me to check an old project." Frank let me in without suspicion. I went straight to the 10th floor, where my father's office was. The room was expansive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Portland. But I had no time to admire the view. I sat at his desk, powered on his computer, and used a backup password I'd seen him enter during a family meeting. Luckily, it still worked. I sifted through files, my heart pounding with every sound in the hallway. Then I found a hidden folder, encrypted with another password. I tried several combinations to no avail. Finally, I typed Vanessa. The folder unlocked. Inside were countless emails, invoices, and records of anonymous offshore investment funds. My eyes lit up. This was gold. I copied everything to a USB drive, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. This was evidence of under-the-table transactions. Money that never appeared in Harris Capital's official books. Meanwhile, my mother worked from her end. She secretly contacted an old friend in the tax authority, a man named Robert, who had worked under my grandfather. She sent him copies of the documents I'd found. A few days later, Robert called back, his voice grave. "Eleanor, what you sent me is a bombshell. Leonard has 4 offshore accounts totaling over $30 million. Unreported. This is clear evidence of money laundering and tax evasion. I'll pass this to federal agencies, but you and Oliver need to be careful. If Leonard finds out what you're doing, he won't hold back." Charlotte accelerated the process. She filed an anonymous complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the IRS while initiating a temporary asset freeze on Leonard. "He won't know what's happening until it's too late," she said, her eyes gleaming like a warrior preparing for battle. We're planting a legal bomb under his feet, and it's about to go off. In the meantime, I decided to stir things up on social media. Using an anonymous account, I began leaking hints about Harris Capital, vague suggestions of investment fraud, questions about the origins of Leonard Harris's wealth. I didn't directly accuse him, letting the press and public dig deeper. Soon, articles started appearing. Is Harris Capital hiding something? Questions surrounding the transparency of a real estate empire. Shareholders grew uneasy. The company's stock dipped slightly, and I knew my father was starting to feel the pressure. One morning, I received a message from Charlotte. The FBI has launched a federal investigation. They're reviewing all the documents we sent. Leonard doesn't know yet, but he'll be summoned soon. I sank into a chair, gripping my phone, and whispered to myself, now he'll know what it feels like to lose control. Meanwhile, my father continued his vacation. I saw his latest post, a photo of him on a beach, cocktail in hand. But I also saw other news. Reporters were starting to swarm him, asking questions about Harris Capital, offshore accounts, and fraud allegations. He still smiled, brushing off the questions, but I knew that smile masked panic. He was losing control, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I held the upper hand. I called my mother, my voice trembling with excitement and anxiety. Mom, everything's falling into place. The FBI is involved. He won't get away. She was silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice both resolute and pained. Good, Oliver. But remember, this isn't about revenge. This is about justice, for me, for your grandparents, and for everything he's destroyed. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Justice. The word echoed in my mind, a guiding flame. The days that followed saw the legal storm we had quietly planted finally erupt. One morning, I turned on the TV and saw my father's face on the local news. Leonard Harris, chairman of Harris Capital, accused of investment fraud and money laundering. The anchor's voice rang out, cold and sharp. Major newspapers echoed the story. Real estate empire collapses, the dark secrets of Leonard Harris. I sat silently on the sofa, clutching my coffee mug, feeling both relief and tension. Harris Capital plunged into crisis. My father's bank accounts were frozen. His strategic partners, those who once clapped him on the back at lavish parties, swiftly withdrew their investments and canceled contracts. The company's stock plummeted, and social media was flooded with critical posts and angry comments from shareholders and clients. My father, the man who always controlled everything, was now cornered like a beast backed against a wall. I imagined him somewhere, perhaps in a luxury hotel in the Bahamas, reading the headlines, realizing his empire was crumbling piece by piece. I received a message from Charlotte. Leonard has returned to Portland. He's trying to contact lawyers, but no one will take his case. The FBI is about to issue an arrest warrant. Be ready, Oliver. This will be over soon. My heart pounded as I read the message. Over. The word sounded both sweet and terrifying. I wanted my father to pay, but I couldn't deny that he had once been my father. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was him. I stared at his name on the screen, feeling as if my heart stopped. I answered, my voice cold. Dad, Oliver. His voice was hoarse, lacking its usual measured calm. Have you seen the news? It's all lies. They're trying to ruin me. You have to help me, Oliver. I listened to him, each word like a knife. He didn't ask about Mom, didn't mention her death, didn't show a shred of remorse. Just the panic of a man losing everything. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. Dad, I'm not sure what I can do, but if you want, we can meet and talk face to face. At the mansion tonight. He was silent for a moment, then agreed, his voice thick with suspicion. Fine, 8 o'clock. Don't let me down, Oliver. I hung up, my hands trembling. This was the opportunity, not just to confront him, but to show him the truth. That Mom was alive. That his crimes had been exposed. I texted my mother, tonight. At the mansion. Are you ready? She replied instantly. I'm ready, Oliver. But be careful. He won't accept defeat easily. At 8 o'clock, I stood before the family mansion, the place that had once been my home, my mother's, and even my father's. The house now felt cold, a shadow of its past. I stepped inside, turned on the light, and felt like I was entering a battlefield. My father was already there, sitting in the living room. His gray suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. A glass of whiskey sat before him, but he didn't drink. just stared into the amber liquid as if searching for answers. "Oliver," he said, his voice weary. "You're here. I need your help. The company is collapsing, and it's all because of jealous rivals. You have to stand by me." I stood still, looking at the man who had once been a symbol of power in my eyes. Now he seemed small, frail, like a wounded animal. But I felt no pity, only rage. "Dad," I said, my voice icy, "before we talk about the company, don't you have anything to say about Mom? About what you did to her?" He frowned, a flicker of weariness in his eyes. "Your mother is dead, Oliver. You know that. Don't drag up the past to blame me." I gave a faint, bitter smile, feeling the knife in my heart twist. "Dead, are you sure?" I turned and opened the living room door. And my mother stepped in. Eleanor Harris. Flesh and blood. Not a hallucination. She stood there, frail but resolute, her eyes blazing as they locked onto my father. He staggered back, the whiskey glass falling to the floor and shattering. He nearly collapsed, clutching the chair, his face pale as if he'd seen a ghost. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice trembling. "No, it's impossible. You're dead." My mother stepped forward, her voice sharp and cold. "Leonard, did you think you could kill me so easily? Did you think you could take everything, my assets, my family, even my life, without paying a price?" He shook his head, his eyes darting between panic and anger. "What are you talking about? Is this some kind of joke? Oliver, you're behind this, aren't you? You two are conspiring to frame me." I stepped forward, standing beside my mother, my voice calm but heavy with weight. "Dad, stop pretending. We know everything. The offshore accounts, the forged contracts, how you threatened Mom to seize her assets. And then there's my grandparents. Did you think their car accident would stay a secret forever?" My mother continued, her voice trembling with pain. "Leonard, I once loved you. I thought you were just ambitious. But you killed my parents, didn't you? For their fortune. And you planned to do the same to me." He laughed, but it was a hollow, desperate sound. "You're both insane. I didn't kill anyone. It was an accident. And you, Eleanor, you think you can stage a fake death to ruin me? You have no proof." I pulled out my phone and played the audio file. The argument between him and my grandfather from over 20 years ago. His voice filled with resentment, threatening my grandfather over the fortune. As he listened, his face paled. But he still tried to shout, "That proves nothing! You're slandering me!" But before he could say more, the wail of police sirens sounded outside. The door burst open. Federal agents stormed in, guns holstered, their eyes cold. An officer stepped forward, holding up an arrest warrant. "Leonard Harris, you're under arrest for money laundering, investment fraud, and accessory to murder." He was handcuffed right there, in the house that had once been a symbol of his power. Reporters were already waiting outside, cameras flashing, capturing the moment the man once hailed as Portland's icon of success was led away like a criminal. As he was escorted out, my father turned back, his eyes a mix of hatred and desperation. "You'll regret this, Eleanor," he growled. But my mother stood there silent. Her eyes no longer filled with pain, but with the resolute strength of someone who had won. But that was only the beginning. The case against Leonard Harris quickly became a national media frenzy. Morning and evening news, major newspapers, viral social media posts, all focused on him. No longer the successful entrepreneur, but the mastermind of a dark financial network. The charges were laid out clearly: money laundering, investment fraud, tax evasion, and accessory to the deaths of my grandparents. My mother and I were called as key witnesses at the trial. The day we entered the courtroom, my heart pounded. Not out of fear, but from the realization that this was the final moment to confront my father. The room was packed with people, reporters, lawyers, former business partners of my father, now looking at him with unfamiliar eyes. He sat in the defendant's chair, his gray suit wrinkled, his hair noticeably whiter, his face gaunt. He didn't look at me or my mother, only stared down, his eyes empty, like a man who had lost everything. When my mother took the stand, I saw her stronger than ever. She recounted everything: the years of threats from my father, the times he pressured her to sign documents, her suspicions about my grandparents' deaths. Her voice didn't waver, didn't falter, as if all her pain had transformed into strength. "I had to fake my death to survive," she said, looking directly at my father. "But I didn't do this for revenge. I did it to protect my son, to protect what was left of my family." My father lowered his head further, offering no response, no defense. I knew he had nothing left to say. When it was my turn, I stood and looked at my father one last time. "You once said I wasn't good enough," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "But I don't need your approval. I just need my mother to be safe, and the truth to be revealed." He finally looked up, his eyes hollow, as if his soul had abandoned his body. I didn't know if he felt remorse, but I knew one thing. The man before me was no longer my father. The trial ended with a 30-year prison sentence. All of my father's assets were seized and Harris Capital officially went bankrupt. Several senior employees were investigated for their involvement, and the dark financial network my father had built over years was completely dismantled. The press called it the biggest scandal Portland had ever seen. But for me, it wasn't just a case. It was the end of a nightmare, and the beginning of a new chapter. After the trial, my mother and I became the center of attention. The media dubbed her the woman who returned from the dead, turning her story into a symbol of resilience. My mother, with her gentle but resolute nature, chose to step away from the spotlight. She sold the old mansion, the place that had once been a home but also a prison, in her final years with my father. The proceeds from the sale were donated to a foundation supporting women affected by domestic abuse and financial manipulation. "I don't need that house anymore," she told me, her voice soft. "It only reminds me of the days I lived in fear." She moved to a small house on the Oregon coast, where she lived peacefully, planting wild daisies and painting. Each time I visited, I saw her in the garden, hands covered in dirt, her smile as radiant as ever. She taught local children how to paint, sharing stories about finding beauty in simple things. Watching her, I knew she had reclaimed herself, no longer a shadow of Leonard Harris. I changed too. I left Urban Vision, no longer wanting to be tied to large corporations. Instead, I opened a small studio called Eleanor Designs, specializing in green spaces and community housing. My goal was simple but clear: build homes that people want to return to, homes that are sanctuaries. Each project was a way to heal, not just for myself, but for others who had lived in houses full of wounds, like my mother and me. When Audrey learned the full truth about my mother and what I had done, she was speechless with shock. "Oliver, why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her eyes red with tears. I took her hand, apologized for keeping her in the dark, and explained that I didn't want to pull her into danger. She hugged me, whispering, "I'm proud of you, but don't ever hide anything from me again, okay?" I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my chest. Audrey and Nathan remained my greatest anchors. We visited my mother often. Trips to the Oregon coast became a joy for the whole family. Nathan ran through her daisy garden, laughing as she taught him how to draw a dinosaur. Audrey and my mother sat on the porch, sipping tea and chatting like old friends. Watching them, my heart warmed. This was my family. Not perfect, not glamorous, but filled with love and sincerity. As time passed, the case of Leonard Harris faded into the background, but its echoes lingered deeply in my mind. Whenever I drove past the old Harris Capitol building, now just an empty concrete shell with a dusty "for lease" sign, I no longer felt hatred. Instead, I felt a twinge of regret. Not for my father, but for the man he could have been. He had everything: a family, a career, the chance to live a meaningful life. But he chose greed, betrayal, and ultimately lost himself. I began writing my story. Not for the world to read, but for Nathan. One day, when he's older, I want him to read it and understand that life isn't just about what you achieve, but how you face its challenges. And I wrote about the greatest lesson I learned. Justice isn't about retaliation, but about daring to stand up for what's right, even when it means standing against your own family. Nathan, my little son, is my brightest light. I spend more time with him, teaching him about honesty, kindness, and protecting those who are vulnerable. One day, while we were drawing in my mother's garden, Nathan looked up and asked, "Dad, is Grandma a superhero?" He paused. "She beat the bad guy," I laughed, ruffling his hair. "You're right, buddy. Grandma is a superhero, but not because she beat the bad guy. She's a superhero because she never gave up, no matter how tough life got." Those afternoons with my family, under the fiery red sunsets of the Oregon coast taught me the true value of happiness. It doesn't lie in extravagant parties, towering skyscrapers, or the approval of others. Happiness is sitting with Audrey, listening to her talk about a patient she helped overcome their pain. It's watching Nathan run and laugh, carefree. It's looking at my mother, the woman who came back from the dead, and seeing her live true to herself. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table in my mother's seaside home, I looked up into the eyes of Audrey, Nathan, and my mother. My voice was hoarse, but filled with emotion. I used to think happiness was about achieving success, about being recognized by others. But after everything I've learned, happiness is living without fear, and being able to hold your head high and say, I didn't betray my conscience. My mother took my hand, her eyes shining. You've made me proud, Oliver, she said. Audrey smiled, resting her hand on my shoulder. And Nathan, with strawberry jam still on his lips, chimed in, Dad's my superhero! We burst into laughter, and in that moment, I knew that no matter how painful the past had been, we had found light. We had found each other. This story, it's been quite a journey, hasn't it? It made me confront things I never thought I'd face, about family, loyalty, and what justice really means. What would you have done in my place, knowing what I know now? Have you ever had to choose between what's easy and what's right, especially when family is involved? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts.